Each year, the Sacramento Metro Chamber conducts a study mission to another city. Participants bring back the best ideas for us to consider implementing right here. This year's focus was Minneapolis St Paul. Peter Tateishi, the CEO of the Metro Chamber, and Roseville Mayor Carol Garcia join us to share what our Twin Cities can learn from the Twin Cities. Next on Studio Sacramento.
At Five Star Bank, we create thoughtful solutions to help the Capital Region thrive, from economic development and education to public health and safety, issues that are vitally important to Sacramento's prosperity. We're proud to be part of the conversation and hope you'll join in.
Mayor Garcia, why the Twin Cities?
Well, Peter and I were in Chicago the year before, and we were talking, and we felt the Twin City was going to be the place to go because they have the collaboration, the coordination, and the regionalism that we as a region feel that we can benefit from.
I mean, you look at Minneapolis St Paul, it's a capital region. Cities are roughly the same size, if you will, as some of our larger cities here. A little bit bigger as a region in all, but truly just an exciting place. It's doing great things that we felt that our region, when you look at our 6-county region, could really learn some lessons from.
Now, Minneapolis and St. Paul, they're not directly adjacent to each other like, say, West Sacramento and Sacramento, right?
Right. No, that was the confusing part for me, having, in my own ignorance, not knowing. When I hear Twin Cities, my assumption is they're just on the other side. No, they're about 11 miles apart from each other. So kind of that distance from Roseville to downtown Sacramento. So there is a spread, and so it really is a region when you look at it. It's not just a continuation, if you will, but a change of name.
What surprised you most about how this area defines itself as a region, given that separation that they have and the misperception that so many of us have about how they're located?
So, what's really interesting when we talk about that, what's funny is that those regions actually used to feud. And so when you talk about the Twin Cities and the idea that if you're Twin Cities, you must be close. If you look at the history of Minneapolis, St. Paul, during census years, they used to actually kidnap people and move them city to city to try to compete as to who
They used to kidnap people?
They literally would kidnap people for the census workers to be able to count who was the bigger city. So there was a healthy competition and outright feud at times between those two cities, who have now come together and overcome those differences, that competition, and understand that they will only succeed as a region, and that the success of one is really based on the success of the other. So it's a completely different story to hear from where it was 20 years ago versus where it is today.
Mayor Garcia, you did an op-ed recently about the study mission and what you learned there. And one of the things that struck me was how you were talking about that they came together, their leadership really came together and focused on key issues and worked together.
They did. And in 1976, or about 50 years ago, they put together what they called the Metropolitan Council. And that's a 17-member board. And those members are appointed by their governor. They're a policy-making board. They look at issues from water to traffic to housing, a variety of housing, and just so many different issues that they look at together and working in coordination with each other to make sure that they're successful as a region. And so I think that that's really helped form a lot of what they're doing.
We have a lot of organizations and initiatives going on in the region, Peter. What can we learn from that example that might be helpful for us to import back here?
So what's really interesting is that instead of having multiple groups with different visions and different missions, you really have an alignment strategy that starts with the public and the private sectors coming together, identifying uniform goals, and then assigning basically tasks to different entities across that region, saying, here's where you can excel, get behind them, instead of kind of ambiguously letting everyone pick something and go to work. So they have a uniform strategy within all of their entities, whether it's a chamber, for them, their regional chamber, or their equivalent to our Greater Sacramento, their Greater MSP, to even their foundation and grant space. They really come together and coordinate those efforts to say, we as a region will succeed when these goals are attained, and how does everyone fit into attaining those goals?
And when they're describing the region to you, when you all were back there, what achievements over, say, the last 10, 25 years have they made that they're most proud of?
I think that a lot of what they've done is renovating some older buildings along the Mississippi River, and they've been very successful in that effort in doing mixed use business and housing. Within that, they've built parks along the rivers and science and technology centers and just all different types of uses that they've renovated some of the older buildings.
And let's talk about that a little bit, because it's really fascinating when you look at the Mississippi, which is the river that they adorn. And in the past, it was something that you turned your back to. And today, they're actually facing the river, and they're embracing the fact that the river is an amenity and an asset.
On both sides of the river?
On both sides.
Really?
And so, I mean, each city technically is on both sides of the river, but when you looked at it, before it was all industrial. You had the flour capital of the world was there in Minneapolis.
The what?
Flour capital, meaning flour that processed, make...
Really?
Yeah, and so it was there, and for I would say half a century, they were the milling processing plant of the world, and produced millions of pounds of flour a day between Pillsbury and Gold Medal and other brands, and so General Mills. And so when you look at those, you had an industry that just lined the river, and so the people didn't see it as an amenity. They saw it as something that was to move goods or to generate power, but it wasn't there as something that you would see as something you'd enjoy from a recreational standpoint, a view standpoint, or just that amenity component that we now enjoy as we see in the American River and the Sacramento River. So seeing them actually start to face the river again and to see that it's an opportunity and embrace it is something that I hope we can learn from, because we have yet to fully embrace our Sacramento riverfront the way that we like to see that.
Well, one of the things that brings to mind is that a lot of times cities in that area have a hard time of bringing people back into their urban core. Is the river strategy a part of them activating?
Yes, definitely. We saw a lot of that. There was one developer in particular that I was impressed with, Peter Remus, and he was a young developer. Actually, he had a outdoor sign company that he sold at a very young age, at the age of 23, to Clear Channel Outdoor, made a lot of money, and went in and started to buy small buildings and starting to renovate them, and actually working with the public and asking them what would they like to see. And so he was very successful, and I was very intrigued with what he had done in some of his projects.
And both St. Paul and Minneapolis have a strategy to attract people to their urban cores. They've transformed areas that were somewhat industrial or were seen as places to work but not to live, and they've changed them into mixed-use housing and to opportunities to attract some in situations similar to our art districts, creating districts that really encourage livability in places where they just were not viewed as a place to live. So they started moving people out of the suburbs and into the core. And part of it was also an intentional strategy around transit. They have a phenomenal transit system between around that region where you can actually
crosses jurisdiction.
Crosses jurisdiction. You can get on light rail from downtown Minneapolis and get to downtown St. Paul in 30 minutes.
Wouldn't that be something?
And they have a clean system.
Yes,
I mean,
they
those
do.
buses are clean.
And it was done intentionally. It was done intentionally to engage the community to use it. So when they designed it, they actually moved it through communities so that people would be encouraged not to see it as a divider or a cut through, but to see it as an asset where you can actually have mobility across the region. So their transit system is a huge component of how they're able to bring people in to the core and see that you can have a lifestyle in that urban setting.
Well, it's interesting that Minneapolis St. Paul is known for its ability to attract younger people into the region. It's not necessarily for us Californians a climate that's as warm and friendly as our own, but they seem to do just fine. And is there anything that you all learned back there about how it is that they're able to retain people in that part of the country where it seems like a lot of folks are moving out?
Right, and I think that a lot of their businesses were attracting some of the young millennials. They have the think tanks, kind of like we do with the glue factory in Roseville. They are bringing these young people in with their ideas and inspiring them, and then turning them over into their businesses and creating ideas and feeding off of each other. And we saw some of that as well.
And you saw, I mean, they have 17 Fortune 500 companies in the region, and
How
so
do they do that?
all of them homegrown.
Really?
Really. So when you look at that, you look at, they had a workforce, and they had some ingenious people who were committed to creating opportunity there. I mean, you look at some of the names that we Target, Best Buy, General Mills, Land O'Lakes. These are big companies, all based out of Minneapolis St Paul region. So they have the ability to attract young professionals from across the country because of the companies that they have there. But two, they really have identified that they need to have cultural amenities or civic amenities within their spaces throughout the region, so that you aren't perceived just by your weather, that you're perceived by the opportunities to activate space, and that your lifestyle is going to be one that you can truly enjoy in the region. So they have a uniform strategy. I keep saying uniform strategy. It's because they actually, when we talk to when we talk to all of these different groups, and they're not related, they all came to the table and were speaking on the same page, identifying the same issues, and talking about a same strategy to actually sustain their model, because they have a 3.5% unemployment rate in this region.
3.5.
3.5%, and they know that if they don't work to sustain that, it will be lost. And so these are the messages that we're hearing on that collaboration coordination. And so when you look at the millennials, they go out, they talk to them about the opportunities and the work-life balances that they can create. And so Minneapolis St Paul, they've done a huge effort to make sure that they are an attractive place for millennials and existing workforces to say, this is where I'm going to live and this is where I'm going to work, but in that order, not in the other.
Well, interesting, in your editorial, you also spoke to how they deal with issues of inclusion and equity.
Exactly.
And I know that there has been a bit of press back there because they've had some of the same tensions between police and community that other parts of the country have. But I was struck by your comment on that. What were you focused on when you made that writing?
Well, I think that they have a diverse population, and when we had one of our first panels with the mayor from Minneapolis, that was one of the issues that she talked about, and how they're trying to work together and include everybody. They have a large Somali population. There's 25,000 Somalians right now over there. And so they just have a diverse population, and I think it's always a challenge for them. And I think we as a region are doing much better in that area with inclusiveness than they are. I think they have a ways to go. So I was very proud of, I think, where we are in that area.
I wanted to also focus on some of the civic amenities that they have. It's been said that they have a huge arts community that's very vibrant. And given their size in relation to our own, they have like the second largest number of seats for theaters.
That's right.
Next to New York?
That's right. They have a huge investment in the arts there. And so they have a huge arts scene from theater especially, but also to just different types of museums and spaces. And it's interesting. Instead of trying to duplicate, they amplify. So St. Paul recognized that, if you will, the hip for the younger folks, whether that was activities like concerts and venues for kind of that millennial age, was better in Minneapolis. But where they did better was in youth and in children and with seniors. And so instead of trying to compete against the same space, they amplified where they can actually do well. And so again, they can focus dollars and then excel in a children's museum, which was amazing in St. Paul, and then not have Minneapolis go after a children's museum, right? I mean, use those assets, catalog those assets, and show it as a regional strength. And that arts dynamic is part of that cultural lifestyle that attracts young people to that region. And so we were really impressed with I mean, we spent time at the Guthrie, which is a great theater, on Friday morning while we were there. We spent time at the Walker Museum, where we met with some education experts. I mean, you just saw it wherever you went in that space that, you know, engaging in cultural amenities was important.
It was interesting. And then also the parks. We haven't talked about the parks,
Yeah.
but St. Paul, they took really small spaces scattered throughout their community, and they made these very small parks using the natural beauty within there and then bringing in man-made materials. And they were creating stages, small stages for small venues within these small parks where people can just come during their break at work and just walk across the street into a small area and sit and have their lunch. It was just nice to see.
They actually are ranked as one of the top parkland cities, regions in the country for having parks and then bikeways as well.
Where does leadership come from in the region?
So this is a critical component I think we learned of Minneapolis St Paul. There's a real public-private leadership component. And so one of the groups that we heard from was a group called the Itasca Group. And really it's those CEOs in town, and they came together at Lake Itasca, and they actually met and they strategized around how do we as the business leaders come together and talk about making priorities and change for Minneapolis St Paul. They came together, but instead of saying we're going to own the entirety of the space, they partnered with the government, civic leaders, and then they looked at the assets that they had and said, and then created champions to go after different individual priorities. And so you have this leadership that comes out of the business leaders and the civic leaders working together, creating a vision, if you will, setting goals, and then working with the existing assets to accomplish those things. And so having that really come together as a region, we don't quite have that yet. And so we have opportunities. We have CEOs starting to engage here in Sacramento. We have the business community clamoring to step up. We saw a great public-private partnership in the Golden One Center here in Sacramento. But as a region, we need to have the whole region invested in a common vision and strategy. And that's where the business community and the civic community really came together and said, we're going to be committed to this.
And again, they're all on the same page. They have the same focus. And they know they have to because they have to be successful as a region in order to attract.
And these bodies that you both are referring to, are they also the places that, in addition to just generating solutions, are they the place where people bring the problems of the region as well?
Yes, they do. So one of the problems is the homeless problem, which we have here, and we as a region through public-private partnerships are, I hope, going to be embarking on solutions to homelessness, but that is one area that they're concentrating on right now.
Yeah, a lot of problems are brought to their attention through that process, but again, when you have a consistent group of individuals meeting to talk about these types of issues, it goes back to the equity point that Mayor Garcia brought up in her op-ed. The reason that became so important was because as they were looking to the future and their long-term sustainability of that 3.5% unemployment rate and the growth of their businesses, they realized that the state was changing, and that if they don't acknowledge those changes and then work through those changes, they will lose their advantage. And so they really took time to understand where are they not failing, but where are they having real barriers and real challenges, and they put it out there. They don't hide it. They actually put it in their own metrics that they put out to in how they measure themselves against like cities. And it's kind of a weird strategy, if you will, because they also put that out to the community, so why you should come here. It's because we have identified these problems and we're working towards solutions and we're measuring them every month and we're putting it out to our community and to across the country so that they're leading by example on those issues.
Now, in terms of their education system and preparing their workforce, how does the region coordinate on those types of activities?
I think that we saw the University of Minnesota was very active and engaged in recruiting students to go into and working with the local businesses to go in and train these students for their workforce. And they have a huge coordination effort in that.
You saw it from a career technical side of education to the university side, and they're all working together from their equivalent of the community college system to the career technical to the four-year university, and as well as the different school districts. But those are part of the metrics that they're identifying and willing to talk about are, again, schools that aren't succeeding the way that they need them to, that are creating those barriers, they're working and drilling in. And that's where also the funding community, the foundations, the grants, they're making a coordinated effort. So instead of having 5 different granting entities out there just throw money in different ways, they're bringing them all together in a coordinated fashion and then focusing on issues where they can invest quite a bit of money to tackle real problems. So that coordinated effort, even at the foundation or funding level, is something that we haven't seen here yet in our region, and it's making a huge impact for them as they're able to take a larger sum of money, if you will, and really invest it in making outcomes happen.
You mentioned before that this was the flower capital of the world, and that they've shifted into different industries, which has impacted neighborhoods, and now they're revitalizing those neighborhoods. What's the future that they have designed for themselves in terms of where their economy is evolving to?
So when you look at Minneapolis St Paul, they're really looking at that innovation space and keeping the strength of the industries that they do have. Yes, a lot of their industries are based in agriculture, and it's a bit of an unfair example to say Minneapolis St Paul is just like Sacramento's capital region, in the sense that Minneapolis St Paul is, almost 2/5 of the entire state. So
I didn't realize that they were at that scale.
So it's a massive, it may even be 3/5. It's a significant portion of the whole state. So as Minneapolis St Paul, the region falls, so does the state of Minnesota. So that dynamic means that they have a different opportunity and control, if you will, to say that Minnesota is invested into that region a little bit differently than you could argue California is invested in the Sacramento region.
We wish it were.
We all wish that Sacramento paid a little more attention to where it's home to. But with that, though, they are looking at that innovation space, sustaining the opportunities. And what they know has always excelled in there is having the workforce. If you have the workforce, you're going to be able to generate ideas, companies, innovation, and they'll have the ability to actually thrive in that space. So they're not looking for a new industry per se. They're looking to say we've got to continue and sustain. And that's the important piece, is they're not having to reinvent themselves as much as flower has moved away, because they've had the opportunity to actually start these great companies that are still headquartered and still doing great work, and still providing opportunities for new companies to come up in the ranks in the region there.
I want to ask you both, if you could import one thing that you saw back in Minneapolis St Paul and immediately have our region implement it, what would it be?
I would say that it would be an effort to have the leaders come together in our region and form a group, maybe something similar to their Metropolitan Council, where we can work together on ideas and really focus in on efforts that would benefit our entire region. And I can see, SACOG, we have that as a start, but I think we can really embellish on that, and that's what I would like to see.
Peter?
I'd like to see the Itasca group kind of come here. So similar to the way that civic engagement comes together, business needs to come together in that same way. And so we kind of have the CEOs together right now with Greater Sacramento, and it's an opportunity for them to show real leadership and be able to push with all of the existing assets that are out there, making change and unifying on our goals.
The study mission, which is a part of the Metro Chamber's regular program, is something that you all do on a yearly basis, correct? Tell us a little bit about what have you brought back over the years that we may see today that we may not be aware of actually came from an idea generated on the study mission?
I think actually Mayor Garcia is a great person to answer that question, because she's had the opportunity to have a ribbon cutting here in the last few months.
We sure did.
Okay.
So it probably started in the city of Philadelphia. We saw it in Nashville, where I talked about the glue factory that opened up in the city of Roseville.
Yeah, we had the glue factory on our show.
That's right. So it's Gordon Fowler and Deborah Odo-Kent from the Health Education Council is located in that glue factory. And those are where the new entrepreneurs are having the opportunity to go in, bounce ideas off of each other. They stay there for probably a period of 6 months. They rotate new ones through, and they really launch new businesses. And so we saw that theme in other cities on the study mission trip that we visited. And so we decided in Roseville it was time to do something, and Gordon Fowler stepped up and we opened up that business.
What a great addition
It is.
to the region as well. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't ask this one question. Did anyone interact with anything related to Prince or Paisley Park while you were there?
You can't go to Minneapolis and not interact in some way with Prince and Paisley Park. So part of the program, because we can't see everything, unfortunately, we're there for 4 days, and two of those days we're traveling, so it becomes a little difficult. But we did have a specific group of individuals, about 15, who actually did get on a bus and do the Prince tour and go to drive by. We weren't allowed to go into Paisley Park, but go through that process.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you both.
Thank you.
And that's our show. Thanks to our guests, and thanks to you for watching Studio Sacramento. I'm Scott Syphax. See you next time right here on KVIE.
At Five Star Bank, we create thoughtful solutions to help the Capital Region thrive, from economic development and education to public health and safety, issues that are vitally important to Sacramento's prosperity. We're proud to be part of the conversation and hope you'll join in.
All episodes of Studio Sacramento, along with other KVIE programs, are available to watch online at kvie.org/video.